We're now going to work on the interior assembly of our sweet pea bag. You're going to need to take both zipper pocket lining pieces, and you're going to want to press the bottom edge on the longer side, so the side that is 7 3/4 inches wide, and you're going to want to press the bottom 1/2 inch in towards the wrong side, so wrong sides together. And you're going to want to do that on both pieces. You're also going to need one of your body lining pieces, and again, use your pattern piece and make sure if your fabric has a direction that it's facing the right way, and just place it right side up. Then you're going to take one of your zipper pocket lining pieces, and we are going to draw a rectangle on the wrong side, and we're going to draw it 1 inch down from the top edge, and you want the rectangle to be 6.5 inches wide, and you're going to want to make it 3/8 of an inch high. So I'm going to go ahead and draw the rectangle, and you're going to want to also make sure that the rectangle is centered. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my rectangle, and then we'll continue with the zipper pocket installation. I've drawn the rectangle on the wrong side of one of my zipper pocket lining pieces. This rectangle is 6.5 inches wide by 3/8 of an inch high. There is 1 inch of space from the top edge of the zipper pocket lining piece up to the top line of your rectangle, and you have 3/4 inches of space on either side of the rectangle. You want to make sure that it's nice and centered. You're then going to take one of your body lining pieces, and you're going to place this zipper pocket lining piece, and you're going to place the top edge of the zipper pocket lining piece 1/2 inch down from the top edge of your body lining piece. And you're just going to want to make sure that it's centered. It doesn't have to be extremely perfect, but you can just do it like that. And then I'm going to pin this in place. I'm now going to go over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew these two pieces together, and I'm going to follow the lines of my rectangle. We're now going to sew the lining piece to the body piece for your zipper pocket. I like to use a shorter stitch length of about 2.5 when sewing the rectangle. It also helps if you keep your needle in the down position for turning corners. The key to getting a really nice looking rectangle opening for your zipper, I find, is turning at the corners. So I leave my needle in the down position, and then I rotate, sew down, and do the same again at all the corners. Back stitch at the end with threads. Now that I've sewn the rectangle in place, I'm going to draw a horizontal line through the center of the rectangle. You don't need to go all the way from end to end. You can stop about 1/2 inch from each end, and then you're just going to draw some diagonal lines from that center line to each of the 4 corners. And then you're carefully going to cut out those lines. I tend to be careful and use my rotary cutter for the center line. And then I use a pair of really sharp scissors to do the diagonal lines, trying to get as close as I can to the corner without cutting any of the stitching. There you go. And then you're going to go over to your ironing board and you're going to pass this lining piece through the opening that you've cut. And you're going to press the seam allowance around the rectangle opening to make it nice and flat. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and then we'll continue. I've finished pressing the rectangle opening for my zipper pocket. I find it helpful if you press from this side as well as the wrong side of your body lining piece. That way there you know the corners and everything are nice and flat. Now we're just going to take our zipper. I didn't have a 7-inch zipper, so I'm using an 8-inch zipper. It doesn't matter if your zipper is bigger because you can just cut it down later once you've sewn it in place. So you just place your zipper right side facing up and then place your lining piece over top. Make sure your zipper is nicely centered in the middle. Now there's a few different ways to keep your zipper in place. You can glue it. You can use pins, whatever you prefer. I actually prefer not to attach it at all because I find sometimes it will shift as you're sewing it, and I usually just adjust the position of the zipper so that it's always nicely centered in the middle of the rectangle opening. So all I do so it doesn't move while I bring it to my machine is I just pin the ends. And then I just bring it over to my machine like this, and then I adjust the position of everything as I'm sewing. I'm now sewing the zipper in place inside of the rectangle opening. As I mentioned before, I don't pin or glue the whole zipper because I like to change and adjust the position, but you can use whatever technique you prefer. I'm going to start up along the top edge. And I usually use a top stitching stitch length of 3, and I sew around the rectangle opening with probably a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, or maybe even slightly smaller. I don't like there to be a huge amount of fabric that can be lifted around the opening. Again, same as when you were sewing around the rectangle box. I keep my needle in the down position to help with turning corners. And I take my time. It's really nice to have a nice, nicely sewn zipper. It makes all the difference. Now when you get to the end with the pull, I lift up my presser foot and I move my zipper pull out of the way, and then again I just adjust the position of my zipper tape if it's moved. I'm going to take my pin out, rotate. Again, I adjust my zipper tape if I need to. And then you go back to where you started, back stitch, and then you cut your threads, and then we're done. I've now sewn my zipper inside the rectangle opening. As I mentioned previously, my zipper is an 8-inch zipper, so I'm just going to trim it so that it is even with the edge of the zipper pocket lining piece. If you're worried about your zipper fraying, you can use fray check. I actually melt the ends of my zipper, and that sort of seals the end. Just make sure that you don't burn your fabric. Now we're just going to attach the second zipper pocket lining piece to the first. Make sure that you have both folded edges along the bottom. And then I'm just going to pin them together. When you sew these two zipper pocket lining pieces together, you don't want to sew them to the body lining piece. So you're going to push that piece aside, and you're going to sew only along the sides and the top edge of the two zipper pocket lining pieces. You want to leave this, this portion open so that you can turn your bag right side out in the final assembly step. And here are the zipper pocket pieces sewn together. You can open your zipper, see that it works, and you still have your opening at the bottom that you will be using to turn your bag right side out. Now, following the same steps as we used for the exterior body pieces, we're going to sew the bottom edge of the two body lining pieces right side together. So again, pay attention to the direction of your fabric if it does have a direction. Just going to pin them together. Along the bottom edges. And then I'm going to sew them together again, press the seam open, and top stitch along both sides of that seam, exactly as I did for the exterior body pieces. I finished sewing the two body lining pieces together, and I pressed open my seam allowance and top stitched along both sides of the seam. I'm going to also fold the side gusset lining pieces in half vertically and mark the bottom centers on both pieces. And then using exactly the same method as we used for the body exterior, you line up the bottom center mark on your side gusset lining piece with the seam in your body lining pieces. Pin those together, pin the top corners, and then pin everything else in between. And you're going to do that to attach both of the side gusset pieces to the body lining pieces. When sewing the side gusset pieces to your body lining pieces, if you want to avoid having a bag lining that's slightly baggy and you want a nicer fit inside the bag, what I usually do is I start with my typical 3/8 of an inch seam allowance at the top, and then as I'm going down the sides, I increase the seam allowance slightly to, you know, 1/2 inch seam allowance or even 5/8 of an inch, depending on the bag that I'm making. For this one, I increased to 1/2 inch seam allowance, starting about 2 inches down from the top corner. All the way down here, I used 1/2 inch, and then as I'm coming up towards the other top corner, I return to my regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you can do that for both sides. And then I've now sewn both side gussets to my body lining pieces, and I'm just going to trim the seam allowance on both sides. I trim to 1/8 of an inch again. And do that on both sides. Hopefully you can cut a little bit nicer than I am right now. Right. Get rid of these.